Hello, I'm Frik, and today we'll talk about a study that we conducted together with the colleagues from the University of California, Berkeley, on users' expectations about and use of smartphone privacy and security settings. Smartphones are the most commonly used type of communication technology. Over 80% of people in the world have a smartphone. Thus, smartphone settings remain one of the main models for information privacy and security controls, and their usability is especially important for protecting users' privacy. For instance, those settings allow users to opt out of data tracking and ad personalization, set passcode for unlocking the screen, enable two-factor authentication, automatic updates, and other features. Yet users don't always fully understand the implications of changing their privacy and security settings. Confusing information architecture, poor usability, and jargon make it even harder to navigate those settings. The knowledge, skills, and experience with technology in general, and privacy and security specifically, may vary across different socio-demographic groups. Thus, poor usability of smartphone settings menus may disproportionately affect certain vulnerable populations, such as children, older adults, lower income, lower education, and marginalized communities. However, little research has been conducted to investigate that. While some prior research focuses on specific socio-demographic groups, for example, older adults, or particular settings in isolation, for example, screen locking, to the best of our knowledge, no prior work offers the broad examination of users' opinions about smartphone privacy and security settings and compares them across socio-demographic groups. Moreover, while prior work explores the convenience of using certain smartphone settings, such as the burden of repeatedly typing a passcode to unlock the smartphone, little research has explored the perceived difficulties with finding and enabling privacy and security settings. These differences highlight the valuable contribution of our research. In this study, we answered the following research questions. Are users aware of privacy and security settings available on their smartphones and the default configurations? Have users configured smartphone privacy settings in the past, and do they intend to do so in the future? What are users' perceptions of self-efficacy or perceived difficulty of configuring privacy and security settings, and what difficulties do they anticipate? What are users' understandings of the implications of changing certain smartphone privacy and security settings, including the impact on overall user experience with their smartphones and the perceived effectiveness in protecting from common privacy and security risks? What are the differences among users with different socio-demographic backgrounds, for example, age, gender, identity, income, education, race and ethnicity, and digital experience, in terms of their past behaviors, intentions to configure the settings, their perceived difficulty, and the impact on overall user experience with the smartphones? To select settings for our study, first, we created a list of privacy and security settings available in the latest versions of two most popular mobile operating systems, Android and iOS, in August of 2020, when we were preparing for the study. Because of the heterogeneity in use in settings availability in specific apps, we didn't include app settings in our analysis. To achieve the more generalized results, instead, we focused only on the settings provided by the mobile operating systems and their default browsers, Safari for iOS and Chrome for Android. Then, two researchers independently rated settings privacy and security impact, discussed in a seminar with 8 other security researchers, and resolved the disagreements. The final list included 19 settings we used eventually in the study. To this end, we conducted an online survey of 178 smartphone users with diverse backgrounds and demographics residing in the United States. Each of the survey participants answered questions about 3 settings selected at random from our list of 19 settings. Our participants were diverse in terms of age, gender, race and ethnicity, education level, employment, and income, and I invite you to refer to more details in the paper about the participants' demographics. As with any research, our study has a number of limitations. For instance, the generalizability of our results is potentially limited by the small sample size, setting selections, and social desirability and overconfidence bias stemming from self-reported answers. Future work is called to complement survey results with the behavioral data from the cognitive interviews or field experiments in more realistic settings with a larger sample size and wider selection of settings. For the sake of time at this presentation, I'll be able to highlight only a few high-level insights. For more details, please refer to the paper. I'll start with the insights about the impact of socio-demographic factors. We found that higher age is associated with less frequent engagement with privacy and security settings, elevated expectations of difficulty with configuring them, and lower concern about privacy and security risks. Hispanic and Latinx participants reported less frequent engagement with privacy and security settings. Biracial participants had less privacy concerns and were more likely to expect difficulties with configuring smartphone privacy and security settings, and also expected more negative impact on user experience. Females were also less concerned about privacy and security risks. Finally, participants who use their smartphone less frequently anticipate more difficulties with configuring the settings, and users who anticipate such difficulties engage less in configuring privacy and security settings on their smartphones. Interestingly, we found that age and race and ethnicity have a significant impact on the past behaviors of configuring the smartphone privacy and security settings less often, but not on the intentions to do so in the future. It can be related to the fact that various socio-demographic groups may be similarly willing to configure their privacy and security settings, but differences in self-efficacy, smartphone experience, knowledge, and skills prevent some of them from actually enabling the settings. This finding suggests that certain socio-demographic groups may feel less prepared or willing to use smartphone settings to protect their information privacy and security online, and thus remain more vulnerable to online risks. Thus, user education and interventions increasing the perceived self-efficacy are especially important for infrequent users and those with low esteem of their personal technical abilities. Overall, many participants were not aware of the existing settings or incorrectly believed to be able to access the settings they don't have. For instance, erasing data from the phone after 10 failed passcode attempts is an existing setting on iOS, but only 20% of iOS users were aware of it. In contrast, the setting does not exist on Android, but about 20% of Android users incorrectly assume they have such a setting. Most participants possess correct assumptions about the default settings, about limiting tracking practices on their smartphones, but hold incorrect beliefs about the authentication and ad personalization settings defaults. For instance, about half of participants believe that passcode is turned on by default, and even more believe that two-factor authentication is on, although in reality, both features require active user action. While many users said they haven't configured certain settings in the past, especially the ones they were not aware of, they were willing to do it in the future. This means that users don't change the settings not because they don't care, but because there are barriers that they cannot always overcome. For example, 80% of participants haven't configured such settings as erasing data after 10 failed passcode attempts, reviewing passwords that have been reused on other websites, enabling attention feature in Face Unlock, and disabling storing audio recordings of interactions with smartphone voice assistants. These are also the settings that many participants were not aware of, which could be one of the reasons for low engagement. But participants had intentions to configure them in the future. These results indicate the importance of settings discoverability on users' engagement with those settings. Interestingly, some users expressed interest in settings currently unavailable on their smartphones. For example, 94% of Android users said they were willing to turn on fraudulent website warnings in Chrome if it was only available. Our participants perceived high self-efficacy. More than 60% of participants expect that it will be easy for them to configure the settings. Whether or not this expectation matches their reality is a subject of our follow-up experiment that is currently in progress. However, up to a quarter of participants anticipate some difficulties with opting out of storing audio of the interactions with the smartphone voice assistants, COVID contact tracing, restricting AirDrop permissions, and configuring mobile browser settings. Users' open-ended answers about why they believe it will be difficult to configure the settings fall into three main groups: anticipated difficulties with finding the settings, perceived lack of knowledge and experience, and technical limitations. Interestingly, many users believe that manufacturers intentionally make it difficult to find and change the settings, indicating low user trust. Most participants anticipate positive impact on their experience from limiting tracking and increasing browsing safety. However, some settings are expected to negatively affect the experience of many participants by limiting the important usability aspects of their everyday smartphone use. For example, because of complicating authentication process or disabling location services, hiding notification previews of their messages, or erasing data after 10 failed passcode attempts. However, 20% of participants don't know how enabling things like attention feature for face unlock or limiting airdrop sharing audience would affect their experience. Lack of such understanding may negatively affect the adoption of these features. Good news are most user participants hold correct beliefs about what settings are effective against the particular online risks. However, some settings, especially website warnings and anti-tracking features, are incorrectly mapped against the risks, which indicates incorrect threat models or wrong assumptions of what settings would protect users against those risks. In the paper, you can find more details about users' mental models of settings effectiveness against various online risks. Overall, participants are worried about all of the online risks mentioned in the survey, and especially about unauthorized financial transactions, inadvertent disclosure of information, unauthorized remote access, such as hacking attacks, and data gathering by companies and governments. They worry a little less about data gathering by individuals, unsolicited objectionable content, harassment, and unsolicited advertising. I don't say they don't worry, I just say that they worry a little less because overall participants were worried about all of the online risks. To improve awareness, discoverability, transparency, comprehension, and usability, we recommend multiple interventions related to the user education and information architecture. Please refer to the paper to learn more about the proposed interventions. So in a nutshell, in our study, we found that many participants are not aware of the available smartphone settings to counter privacy and security risks and have not changed them on their devices due to the anticipated difficulties with configuring the settings and expected negative impact on user experience. Yet, many of them are willing to change them in the future. While on average, more than half of our participants expect settings to be easy to configure, up to a third of participants anticipate difficulties with these tasks due to expected poor information architecture, lack of experience and knowledge, or technical limitations. Some participants believe that manufacturers make the settings hard to find and understand on purpose to maximize data collection. Finally, we found that some socio-demographic groups, such as older adults, racial and ethnic minorities, and females, are particularly vulnerable to online risks, as many of them are less concerned about online privacy and security, engage less in configuring smartphone privacy and security settings, anticipate more difficulties with configuring them, and expect their negative impact on user experience. The paper provides recommendations for improving the situation, and I kindly ask you to refer to the paper for more details. Thank you for your attention.